Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. We're living in interesting times. I'll just do a quick intro for you, and then we'll get into it. Today we're speaking to Craig Davis. He's the co-founder of Sendle. He's an advisor for the KPMG High Growth Ventures arm, plus also like an adjunct professor at the UTS School of Business. And how did that come up, just quickly? Because how do you become an adjunct professor?
I don't really remember, Alex. I think when I came back to Australia a few years ago, I was introduced to the dean of the business school, and he seemed to think it was a good idea. So I think it's about that simple.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I'd love to get one of those. Yeah, like if there's any people out there, that are offering them up, please let me know.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, but like in all seriousness now, this is a series that we're trying to help business owners across the world to handle this extremely challenging situation that we all find ourselves in. Like I just saw the news last night that the Prime Minister of Australia has confirmed that the lockdown is going to continue on for like at least another month. And that's assuming that there are specific things that have to be put into place. And so we've already been in this thing for almost like a month now. It's another month that's about to happen. A lot of businesses are just struggling across the board. They're devastated, right? There's a few that are doing well. And there's a few that have adapted, but the majority are kind of stuck. And so, this is kind of a conversation to help the stuck people, but also to help the companies that are just looking for kind of some inspiration and some positivity, like in this extremely challenging time. Yeah. But I figured because you have so many parts and so many kind of areas where you have expertise, right? And you're seeing this kind of unfold through like a number of different like lenses, right? Because you've got like the co-founder lens, and then you've got the advisor lens, and I'm sure the network that the network of kind of entrepreneurs that you probably have like around you kind of have like a third lens. And what are you seeing? Yeah, like in terms of the Sendle lens, yeah, because obviously it seems like for Sendle, this would be going up, right? Like this is probably a good time for Sendle. Is that true or not?
Yeah, look, Alex, it's an excellent question. If I could start, I'll answer it from slightly earlier in the question, which is
please
kind of what's going on.
Yeah,
and like the honest answer is I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. And I don't think anybody has any kind of crystal ball here. So there are so many unknowns. And I think what we all need to do is deal with kind of what's in front of us and look at data and make hopefully intelligent guesses. As far as Sendle's concerned, the business is going, yes, very well. There's a major shift to e-commerce. And I think that a lot of that shift will stick. So there's me making a bit of a prediction, but I think that for a lot of people, it's sort of their introduction to e-commerce. So it's not a new thing, of course, but for a lot of people, they've been fond of going to the shops, buying things from traditional sources, and buying things online is something they haven't really done before. I think, now that everybody's doing it, a lot of that behavior will change on a permanent basis. And who knows when shops are going to reopen, bricks and mortar shops are going to reopen, and how the behaviour will shift back with that.
So I'm going to ask you pretty direct questions. Like if I ask you anything that's kind of uncomfortable, that you just say, look, no, like I prefer just to not share. But I'm going to ask the questions that everyone kind of wants to know, and you feel free to either answer or don't answer, right? That's up to you. But you're seeing kind of e-commerce from the lens of the shipping companies, right? And so you actually get to see or to feel the volume, the change in volume. What are you seeing in terms of that volume at the moment? Like since this whole thing started, like, is it? Yes, please.
Yeah, look, it's ramped up pretty significantly. So in the US, the team launched in the US on Black Friday, big retail day in the US.
Wow, yeah.
So that was the beginning of Sendle as a service in the US market.
That's good timing for now, I guess, because,
Yeah, and look, and all these things, nobody knew what was coming along, and certainly not us. But the business is going very well there. It's well ahead of forecast. And then since January, the business has grown in pretty spectacular fashion, both here and in the US. So, there are some companies that are essentially beneficiaries of this crisis, and that's wonderful. But let's not forget that it's a crisis and it's not wonderful at all, and it's really challenging or catastrophic for a lot of people, and there's a lot to deal with. So, here and there, Zoom and Slack, online tools. We're using Zoom right now. I'm sure if we were doing this 2 months ago, I would have been in a studio with you.
Yes, exactly.
And so everyone's having to learn to work remotely, all those sorts of things. And there are businesses that are arrayed around those kinds of shifts that are going to do well out of this. But I think for the most part, it's just very challenging. And even in businesses that are in a position to do quite well in these circumstances, I think it's still nevertheless challenging. There's still the rest of your life that is going on. To work in different circumstances. You've possibly got financial pressures that you didn't have, even if your business is doing okay. Because in order to manage through this crisis, I think most businesses are well advised to really look after their cash and to minimize their costs wherever they can. And if you're a startup, to minimize your burn rate.
Yeah, it feels like there's two parts of the pie right now, right? Or two pieces of the puzzle where either it's going extremely well for you, and so you have some cash flow issues, right? Because you shouldn't be growing too fast. That's what they say, right? But then there's also on the other side that it's not going well for you, and so there's cash flow issues, right? And so I think that at the center of all this is a lot of challenges around the cash flow side of things, and I think it's challenging on the two fronts. But I did see, was it the other day, that Amazon can't handle even the demand in orders. That's kind of how much of a shift has happened in terms of e-commerce, right? Where there's so many people trying to buy stuff that even Amazon, that has the most advanced logistics, I think, of any organization, is only prioritizing the essential items now across their websites. That's Amazon, So what kind of demand is out there where a company like Amazon can't even fulfill it?
Well, all those things that people liked to buy themselves, and now they're buying online, excuse me, out of necessity. And I would say out of necessity, and for some people now out of choice, now that they have a taste of the convenience and they've got over some trust issues around e-commerce, and am I going to get scammed here? Can I rely on things that I buy on marketplaces or that I buy from Amazon? And so the demand, and there'll be good data around this pretty soon, I think. Because one of the great advantages of e-commerce and online businesses is there's always plenty of data. So I think that the NAB produce an online retail index in this market. I think that comes out monthly. I think that'll be visible soon. You'll see there'll be a massive uptick in those things, and even in payment methods around that too. So people like Afterpay, 80% of their business is in online purchases. And even though their share price has bounced around and they're constantly providing market updates, I think what it does indicate is there's plenty of indications of a lot of activity. So shipping is one, transaction volume is another. So people like Stripe, who are handling online payments, I'm sure their business is booming as well. And of course, the giants like Amazon and eBay, I'm sure they're both doing very well. So we'll see numbers in the next few weeks that'll confirm all that. I'm pretty confident. Yeah,
right. And are you seeing kind of like any specific industries that are just a lot more successful than others in terms of e-commerce online shopping? Because you probably have industries across the board where you're like, wow, that's interesting that one is performing so well where this one is not. Is there anything which you can share in terms of that?
Yeah, again,
because I know this is all really interesting, like trying to understand this.
Yeah, there's data around this too. Actually, there's some Australian data that was published a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. It's hard, actually. Time is one of the things that's become very elastic.
It has, hasn't it? It's really interesting. I find it's really interesting. It feels so long and so short at the same time.
So I said 2 weeks ago. It's probably only a week ago.
Could have been 4 days ago.
It could have been. Yeah. And there was some data out of the US even more recently than that. And some of the things that are doing quite well are people in the sort of beauty and cosmetic space. So that's an area that's doing well. Obviously, anything that's travel related is doing badly at this point. Alcohol is doing well. There's a thing. I've got some friends who are actually in the beauty and cosmetic space and the skincare space, and they were telling me about the lipstick index, which is a phenomenon that's been around through a few crises.
Okay.
And that actually lipstick sales often go up in times of chaos and uncertainty. And I think the psychology is that, well, there's a lot of things I can't do, but one thing I can do is I can take care of myself. And so cosmetics is something that quite often in a crisis does okay.
Yep.
But clothing is not doing so well because people don't feel the need to dress up. You're not going out. You're not, you're not having to impress anyone. You're not having to put on your sort of professional outfit.
Yeah, sure.
To go to work. So clothing sales are not typically that great at the moment.
Yeah, I was thinking about actually, I was like, should I wear a shirt for this or should I just wear Webprofits t-shirt? I figured, everyone is in, like these t-shirts now.
Yeah, so. I think the basic question each day is pajamas or not.
Yeah. I think because of the amount of video calls, it's like pajama bottoms or not.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. It's an interesting shift that's happening, I believe, right now, where we're already heading towards the digital revolution. Yeah, it started in 2000 or whatever it was. I'm that old now that I can remember the boom and the bust, and I thought I kind of had missed the wave. Yeah, I started back in 2003 or whatever it was, and I was like, oh no, it's already now past. It's now 2020, and it's almost just starting again now. But it's such a big, immediate shift that's happening right now, and I know that as the advisor of the KPMG High Growth Ventures, you're probably having quite a lot of conversations about this at the moment. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, I think there's lots of shifts that are going on at the moment, Alex. And again, I say this because it's just my point of view. It doesn't mean that I'm right. And again, I'm trying not to prognosticate. But I think one of the big shifts is that kind of all bets are off. And a lot of the things that were working well for you may not work well from now on. So profound is the change, I think. Now, you can look at that as being intimidating and threatening, or you can look at that, and I would advise everyone to look at it this way, with a kind of a positive and open and optimistic mindset. It's a chance to rethink a lot of the bits of your business. So what I'm saying here is, a shift back to first principles. So whether it's digital or not, digital or analog, I think is less significant than taking the time and taking this opportunity to go back to first principles. And what I mean by that is, what's your product like? So the product that got you to where you are may not get you to where you need to get to. And there's a lot of businesses that have had kind of mediocre products, and that's been okay. You can get away with it. If you've got a mediocre product with brilliant marketing, for example, you might be able to skate away with that. Right now, my advice would be to go back to your product and have a really hard look at it and challenge all your own assumptions. And, one of the things that I spend a lot of time in the startup space, and one of the things about startups is that, you know, they're always living with an existential crisis. You know, they are by nature, they're bootstrapped, so they're spending, you know, money that the founders have saved, and there's only so much of that, or maybe they've raised some investment, and now you're accountable to a whole bunch of other people, and they don't give it away for nothing, and there's very high expectations that are attached to any level of investment.
Yep.
And so you need to, in startups, you're constantly having to examine your product, and you're trying to figure out whether your product is good enough to take to market. And that's it's a very high bar. And so for a lot of businesses that have been around for a while, I think they need to ask those same questions. Is my product or my service, is it really good enough for this market? Does it fit the needs of the market now? Because those needs have changed. And the best way to navigate all this uncertainty is to totally double down on your customer understanding. What do you know about customers? What's important to customers? And let go of your own preferences in that. Not what you want to be important to customers, but what actually matters to them. And so, yeah, that's a very tough test, and they're very hard questions to ask, and genuinely have an open mind when you hear the answers, because often people are going to say they're going to call your baby ugly, and you've got to be prepared to hear that
publicly,
and you've got to decide.
And they'll like that comment, won't they?
Yeah. There's a great kind of rule of thumb about product market fit in early stage businesses, but I think this applies to all businesses. And, you know, if you ask people, indirectly, say through a survey, and you said, look, if my product went away tomorrow, how would you feel about it? And your choices were very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or don't really mind, unless you've got about at least 30% of people saying they would be very disappointed, then you wouldn't take that product to market. Mm-hmm. And you're not asking everyone, you're asking the market that you've already identified. So if 30% of those people aren't going, I'd be really disappointed if this product disappeared on me, then that's an indication that you're probably pushing water uphill. Or maybe you're flogging a dead horse. So I think it's a really good time to go back and to ask those questions, really examine what it is that you're doing for customers currently and how valuable that is, and what you're not doing for customers that they consider to be important or valuable.
Yeah, right. And so in the startup space, like, it's kind of the same as it was before, but but it's like now everybody is a startup almost. Is that kind of how you're seeing it? Like, because startups, they always have a hard time. Is it just as hard? Is it like a bit easier now? Like, how has it changed for startups?
Oh, it's harder for startups. I think this is going to be, this is a very, very difficult time for startups, because, the advice that most of them are getting from investors is that they need to be managing their cash burn rate or their runway, and they need to be scenario planning to the end of next year in the expectation that there will be no more money. So whatever you've got to work with, you need to make it work until the end of next year. Now, that may be a totally worst case scenario.
Yep.
But that's kind of the advice that's coming out of the top tier venture capital firms and advisors, which is you need to expect and plan for that scenario. And if things get better, that's great.
Thanks for sharing. And that's great information. I think from the rest of the companies out there that have got past the startup stage, where the majority of them now have potentially a service or a product that is just not in demand anymore, that is not at all relevant anymore, and that just happened overnight, right? And so, like you suggested before, that basically all our businesses should take the startup approach. Yeah, is that right? Like is that what you were kind of?
Well, no, I'm not saying all businesses. Yeah, I'm not saying all businesses should take a startup approach, but what I am saying is there are things to be learnt from the startup community that are relevant for these other businesses.
The product market fit conversation.
Yeah, and some of those businesses will essentially be starting over because what they've been doing, there is no longer a market for it, or that market is much diminished. And so, classically, in startups, they call that maneuver a pivot. It's just a fancy word for going, there's opportunity. Someone's moved my cheese. Where do I need to go now? And we've seen examples of that in small businesses who have gone from making artisanal gin to making hand sanitizer, for example.
Yeah.
So, and there's lots of examples of people going, aha, so here's an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Not that alcohol, as it turns out, is a dying business at the moment.
It's not at all, is it?
But still, there's a need that's been identified, and there's some expertise and some resources that could be turned to address that need. And so I think being highly adaptable in the way that we think, being agile in our thinking, flexible in our thinking. There's businesses that are all of a sudden creating personal protective equipment or screens for supermarkets and for your barista to work behind. That they weren't in that screen business before. There wasn't a screen business. And so I think, you can look around and you can probably see opportunities for new products, or maybe to refocus your business on an entirely new area. Yeah,
for sure. I think, I was having this conversation the other day with someone, with Noel Kagan actually, and we were just saying that we're currently in the economy is pretty tough right now, and it's in a state of contraction. So there's less money that's going around, and so that money that's actually left over, there's a fight for it, right? And so not every business is going to make it through this, because they can't, because there's just, the spending is less.
Yeah.
The government subsidies are going some way to help in the next, say, 4 or 5 months. But at the end of that, there's going to be a massive cliff that we'll see how that kind of turns out. But what is some advice that what's some advice you would give to businesses on how they can be one of the survivors, because not everyone can.
Yeah, totally. So, and I've heard that from a number of investors and family offices who are all saying, look, competition for capital is fierce. And for a lot of people who are professional investors, what they're doing first is they're looking after their existing portfolios. So if they've already invested in companies, they're going to do, in their best judgment, what they think is going to take care of those initial investments. If you're a small business, that's different, because you probably haven't taken investment in the same way, but you might have loans from the bank, and they may be secured against your house and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So look, my advice is, and we've touched on this before, my advice is that the best way to navigate all of this is to focus on customers. You've got to look at, you've got to deeply understand your customers, what's changed for them, what's shifted for them, what's valuable to them, what problems that they have, what pain points they have, what triggers and drivers they have that you can work with. And, and a lot of those things, some of those things may not have changed, some of those things may have changed in a kind of a very significant way. Mm-hmm. So understanding that I would say, is the number one thing. The second thing is look after your people. So if you're a sole trader, you've got to look after yourself. If you're a small business with 5 employees, then 5 or 10 employees, you need to look after those people. You've hired them for a reason. You've decided to keep them for a reason. They're valuable. They provide leverage in the business, and you need to be getting the best out of those people in order for you to have the best chance of being successful. And as a result of those first 2 things, you're in a better position to sort of reconsider your products or your services. So now you've got good data and understanding of customer needs. You've got a team or yourself who is being well managed. You're in a position to make important decisions around products. And if you get those things right, then you've got a better than most chance of that turning into some kind of traction and success. But, this is a crisis, and not everyone behaves well and thinks well and makes good decisions in a crisis. And so that whole thing about taking care of people, taking care of yourself, is really significant. That's not about just kind of being nice self. That's about operating at something like your best, because you just don't want to be making you don't want to be making poor decisions at this point. You want to try and be making really good ones.
Yeah, that's super advice. What time frame are you suggesting these things happen in? Because I know there's like quite a lot of companies that the thought of that process is so big, because they're the company that they had kind of at the start of this crisis, but is completely different to what it should be now, right? And so there's this conversation of, is it better to just wait a bit more and see, like, how fast should I be doing this? Like, and so what would you say to that side of things,
Look, one of the things that was true before this COVID-19 virus, and I think will remain true, is that the world's getting faster, and right now we're confronted by that in a very unfortunate way. But there's an expression that says it's no longer the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. And so the answer to your question is, when should this start happening? It should already have started happening. And for a lot of businesses that I know, it started a month ago. At the early signs of this, making good decisions and making them quickly is part of what you need to do in order to manage a business well, even in the best of times, but certainly in the worst of times. So, it's not a good time to procrastinate. It's a good time to think things through and make decisions, and then act on those decisions, now. So I wouldn't be, I don't think anyone is sitting there thinking, oh, look, I'll just ride it out. I reckon it's going to be okay again in a week or a month, and I'll just kind of suck it up and see what happens. I don't think that's good practice. I think what is good practice is, as we've said, is, take this opportunity to understand what's happening to your customers and what matters to them. Figure out if there's other problems you can solve for them. Look after yourself, look after your people, and then make some decisions around, are you actually going to develop products or services to satisfy those needs that you've identified? And if you're going to do that, get on with it. And if you are going to do that and get on with it, then get on with it in a way that, again, is disciplined. So test. Develop something, test, learn, iterate. Don't bet the farm on a harebrained scheme that's like a 1 degree shift from what you're doing, but apply some real discipline around this. You've got a hypothesis. I understand my customers. I've got a hypothesis. I'm going to try this out in a small way, do it quickly. I'm going to see them learn. I'm going to gather some more information and data and feedback out of that. I'm going to tweak it a bit, do it again. And if it turns out at some point that it was just a really bad idea, then you can just cut it off and come up with another one.
Yeah, I think the companies that are going to struggle the most are the ones that are the least open to change or the most resistant to change. And I think that's more from kind of their structures, their products, and their internal cultures, but it still has to happen. Like, it can't not happen. I mean, that's just an extra challenge to have to face. I think you seem to maybe kind of have like a lot of people and organizations kind of who you speak with that are in the digital space that are already kind of that way. But there's also quite a lot that are kind of stuck outside of the digital space. So what do you do, like, if you're out of that space, like, and you have to now say, well, I can't advertise outside anymore. Like I can't deliver my product anymore in the way that I did before, and I now need to move to digital. Like, how do you advise a company like that to move to digital? So what would you say to somebody like that?
I think the principles are still the same, Alex. And so for sure, I mean, I spend more time with companies that are technology driven or they're delivered digitally. But I'm working with a company now, which is it's an advanced manufacturing company.
Okay.
So they're working, half their team is working remotely, half their team is on site because the nature of what they do, they have to be in the building. They're working with, expensive and highly calibrated physical manufacturing equipment. They can't do what they do unless people are in the building. But the principles in that case are the same ones that we've been talking about, which is now is a time for real focus. And that focus has to be not a focus on what you want to do or what you hope might happen or on what has worked before. So it's not that those things aren't of any value, but that you need to recognize them for what they are. Your focus should be on what are customer needs now and what are the best opportunities now and what are the biggest problems that customers have now. And then are we equipped and do we have the capability or the capacity or could we develop it to solve those problems? And so, again, it doesn't matter whether you're digital or analog. I think those principles still hold. So in the case of this particular company, we're looking at the strategy for the company, and in particular, we're looking at the sectors of the market where we absolutely need to focus. And we learned this with Sendle early on. Sendle now it's a technology company, but it's a delivery business. And in the beginning, we first developed a marketplace, a two-sided marketplace for sharing things that was still useful. It could be, I've said of these coffee cups, I don't use them anymore, so I'd like to give them away. I'm not going to try and sell them. I'm just going to try and give them away. I'd be happy if they went to another home because otherwise they'll just end up in landfill, which is what happens about 95% of the time.
Definitely.
So we built a marketplace to do that. And then Sendle was born out of the requirement that people have 30% of the time to send this thing they wanted to share to someone else. So if you and I live in the same neighbourhood, if we both live in Newtown in Sydney, then I could post this and you would go, hey, I really like those. Can I have them? And I'd say, yeah, sure. Swing by and pick them up. But if I'm in Newtown and you're in St Kilda in Melbourne, there's a lot of friction in that. And I'm just trying to share it and give it away to you. Am I going to go to the post office and wrap it up and pay to ship it? And then you're going to send me the money for the shipping and, what a kerfuffle. And so Sendle was born out of all that friction. And, and it took us a long time to figure out exactly who the service was for, because we came from this marketplace, whereas essentially it was consumers sharing things with other consumers. But that wasn't really the opportunity for Sendle. So even though that's where it started, the opportunity was consumers send things once or twice a year. Small businesses send things 10 times a month, 20 times a month, 100 times a month. So for a bunch of quite smart people, it took us a long time to figure out that the opportunity was in the small business space, and everything looks, obvious in hindsight. And it took us a long time to get there. So, that's an example of really thinking about what to focus on.
And who do you service now?
Small businesses.
Small businesses, and specialize with the commerce transactions, or is it basically across
some of them
the board?
Some of these people have got they've got a corporate job and a side hustle, and they're selling things on eBay.
Yep.
Or they might have a Shopify store that they've set up. They might be just selling stuff, drop shipping and putting stuff on Gumtree. All the way through to more sophisticated businesses that have got, a real brand, and they've got a classy shop front, and they've got a whole story, and maybe they've had a hand in the formula or the making of the product. But what we're clear on now is who we're for and who we're not for, and I think that's part of what we're talking about here. Strategy is about making choices and about deciding what to do, and by definition, what not to do. And now's the time to be really figuring out what not to do in order to focus your more limited resources for most businesses on the things that you need to do and do brilliantly. And if ever there was a time to there's a disproportionate level of reward about solving problems brilliantly. Like, if you solve a problem just kind of well, that's great. But it's not good enough to generate a real flywheel effect and word of mouth and kind of virality in the business. You need to solve problems brilliantly. And when you do, people will go, hey, Alex, I just discovered this thing. It's so amazing. You must try it.
You must try it out. Yeah.
And that's like the oldest marketing trick in the book, except it's not a trick.
Yeah.
You can't pay to make that happen, not efficiently. You have to do the work on the product end. And to do the work on the product end, we're right back to understanding customers.
It's interesting, like, it's such a fantastic point, because today, like in the COVID-19 world, you can't create a need and then try to fill it. That was, a couple of months ago, right? It's like, hey, look, I've got this thing. I'm going to have to create the need first, and then I'm going to have to fill the need. Now you just need to fill actual needs. Like, you just have to understand this. I think this comes back to your point, which is speak to your customers, speak to the market, actually understand, what are the real pain points, and then try to solve them. Because then you don't even really have to sell that much to sell it, because there's the pent up demand for the solution. Yeah. And I think that's what you've been kind of explaining over this, this podcast, is that you kind of have to just to understand your customers at a level that you may not have done before, or that you may have done, but it's now shifted. Yeah,
I think that's totally right. And, listening, as simple as this sounds, listening in all its forms, observing in all its forms, paying attention in all its forms, has never been a more valuable skill right now. Because we're all slightly arced up because of this crisis, because all of us, to some extent, are emotionally impacted by this. I was reading this guy called David Kessler, who's one of the co-authors of the 5 Stages of Grief, which is, now a pretty well understood framework around grief counseling and in psychology. And he's just written a new book, and he was talking about, in this interview, I think it was Harvard Business Review, he was talking about how anxiety doesn't really do justice to what everyone's feeling currently. So, of course, anxiety in a clinical sense exists as it did before COVID. But he said it's not quite the right word for what many of us are feeling most of the time now. And he said, I think it's kind of, and he called it anticipatory grief. He said, we have this expectation that even if nothing terrible has happened yet, that it will, and it's already happening in a health sense to many other people, and in a business sense to many other businesses, or if not in my business, in this market, in other businesses, in other markets, and so on. And he said, all that has us, we're all kind of on edge. We're all a bit jangly around that. And so just understanding that's really important, because what that will do is going to affect the way that you hear things from customers, to go right back to customers. It's going to affect the way that you look at data, if you have data around your customers and their behaviors. And so being aware of it, and then trying to bring some real clarity to it, and so that you're not just hunting around for things that confirm your own viewpoint, that you're actually open to looking at what's really happening. There's a thing in startups that says that, most startups fail, like 97% of startups fail.
Right.
And 2 of the biggest reasons are unexamined assumptions. People go, I know what the answer is, and they just, and I've done this myself at great expense. I can see what the problem is. I know the answer. I'm going for it. That's essentially an unexamined assumption. Or I
think we've all done that, by the way. I've done that so many times. I think with age, you realize, wait, just go a little bit slower, ask a few more questions, save yourself 2 years of pain. You know?
And ask the right people. Don't ask people that you kind of know are going to say nice things.
Right.
That's a great idea, Alex. You always have great ideas. That's not useful feedback. You want the tough and critical feedback. And the other reason is unconscious bias. So we're hunting around to confirm our own suspicions. And those are very dangerous practices now. And that's sort of my point.
Great.
And that comes all the way back to self-care and looking after your team. You do not want to be operating in that jangly, heightened state where you're not really listening and you're not really observing.
Which is hard sometimes when you're going through something so significant as what we're going through right now, to keep that level head, to keep that the right kind of thinking. But I think that comes to your point, to look after yourself first. So what are some kind of tips or something like that, or advice on, like, how do you look after yourself right now? So what are some of the things would you do,
So look, I'm right into this for a variety of reasons that we probably don't have time to go into, but I spent a large part of my professional life with only one real strategy, which is, I need to just work harder than everybody else.
Yep.
And because there's other people who are smarter or more talented or whatever. And so the way that I need to compete with that and succeed in that environment is just to work harder. And that's okay as a strategy for a time. And after a while, though, that comes at quite a significant cost to health, both mental and physical and spiritual, and to relationships, and to a few other things. And so I was, propping myself up on a whole bunch of stuff which wasn't particularly healthy. Mm-hmm. So I learnt the consequences of that kind of brutish strategy a few times over, and quite painfully. And so some years ago went, there's got to be a better way of operating in the world and not trading off ambition, but figuring out what actually is supportive and sustainable. And so, exercise is important, nutrition is important, sleep is important, and then developing practices that help with emotional intelligence are important. Practices that help. Well, meditation is one.
Okay.
Mindfulness and meditation, just any form of attention training, because that will help build self-awareness, and neurologically it starts to change the way your brain is functioning, and over time even the structure of your brain. Self-management, so how you work with your emotions, how you regulate those, when you how you handle triggers, some strategies around that when things are triggering for you. I think it's tools like journaling is a really powerful tool around that.
Sure.
Examining your motivations.
Time for it too, right?
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
And without getting right into the weeds on this, but understanding your own motivations and values and your sense of purpose is really important. And I know this is surfacing a lot for people now because it is a crisis.
Yeah. And
they're going, what am I doing? Why am I even doing this? How important is this to me?
Yeah.
Is this what I want to be doing with my life right now? And for some people, that's an easy, like, yes, absolutely. Hell yeah, I love this. This is exactly what I want to be doing. And for other people, it's like, yeah, well, actually, I've always wanted to be a stand-up comedian, or I've always wanted to,
I'll buy that Udemy course. Like, I think I bought one on singing. I bought one on guitar. I've bought a bunch of them because it was a sale, obviously. They got a sale on. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, and the whole notion of, we live in a culture often where the idea of looking after yourself is kind of considered somehow, a flaw or a weakness. You're not made of tough enough stuff. And we often think we just need to row harder, like we're in some kind of galley ship. But actually, looking after yourself is a smart strategy. And again, I've learned this the hard way. You have to take care of yourself. My wife is a nurse, and she has to deal with some pretty confronting stuff. And she's just now by default just goes, I need to take the dog for a walk. I need to go to the beach and have a swim. If I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of other people. I think that applies more broadly. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people, customers, employees, investors if you have them, and so on.
I think, I think there's, again, some super points. I'm also of the perspective that I'm not the smartest and I'm not the best, but I can outwork everyone. But if I just work 24/7, and I think I did that for most of my 20s, half my 30s, and I think as you get older, you have a bit less energy, but then you have a lot more kind of responsibility because you've achieved something after that amount of work, and so I think the work ethic's critically important. I think on the other side of it now with the crisis, with like if you're at home, you need to find some structure and to be disciplined. And I've started to work in the morning from 5:30 until 3, and I just stop at 3, and it's very, very difficult. And then I might, start again at 7. I'll check some emails and some Slacks or whatever. But I really try to be extremely productive, to work at the peak of my ability, but to stop and then to walk and then to move, because I realized very quickly, on in this pandemic, that there were a couple of days where I only stood 3 times the whole day, and I went to bed, because I got the couch, the kitchen, bathroom, and I drove to get my coffee. And I was like, wait, this is very, very, this is extremely risky right now, because if I'm not as healthy as I can be, as structured as I can be, and if I don't have space, then I won't be the leader that I need to be to ensure that, we kind of survive this thing and hopefully thrive. And so, I totally kind of hear you on that side of it. And it's really, really challenging to find that balance. It really is. One last question. And this is, I think, the hardest one people professionals are trying to face, especially if they're achieving success, is how do you celebrate success right now, right? Because I already have quite a few people that are saying, hey, we shouldn't be marketing right now. We should be, because of actually how bad all of this stuff in the world is. And I'm of the opinion that we need to market to ensure our staff stay employed. And so the government isn't the only answer out of all this. But then if you succeed and you want to celebrate it, how do you celebrate in this environment, right? When it's kind of difficult, but it is really important to celebrate the small wins, because otherwise we all just kind of end up just being depressed, right? But how do you approach that? Because you want to succeed. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Alex. I think we need to watch out for our natural disposition. So, and what I mean by that is we kind of hardwired towards the negative. We're all, as a species, we're inclined towards the negative. There's a great there's a guy called Rick Hansen, who's a very accomplished psychologist his life works around this space, and he got this great expression that says we are Velcro for bad and Teflon for good. And
so true.
And he says that roughly about we hang on to bad experiences about 5 times more than we do to good ones, and the way that you should compensate that. And he said that's all rooted in our kind of ancient brain that was is still configured for saber-toothed tigers and other kind of marauding, man-eating animals. And now we're dealing with, Slack messages and emails. But what he would say is, we need to make a very deliberate effort to open ourselves up to those good experiences, or these things, these sense of achievements, these wins, these successes, and very definitely kind of drink them in and let them kind of settle in us. And so, he argues that within, I think he talks about 15 or 20 seconds, if you kind of just sit with it, and it could be as simple as a compliment, like, those glasses look great on you. Or it could be, hey,
Thank you, Craig.
Total pleasure.
Thanks.
We should pause now for 20 seconds while we just bathe in that.
Yeah.
Or it could be a win in the business of some kind, that we do need to take the time to recognize that and appreciate that and go, hey, we did great, or I did great, we did great, whatever it is. And so that's hard now because we're all working remotely and it's a bit trickier on Zoom. But still, it's not that hard to set things up and go, hey, it's Friday, 4 o'clock, put on a funny hat and let's get yourself a drink, a cup of tea or a cocktail, whatever suits you. And we'll gather around the Zoom table and we'll talk about the things that went right this week. Or even, there's a nice simple framework about good, bad, and ugly, which I'm pretty used to now and gets used a lot with in startup accelerators, which is, what was good this week, what wasn't, what was bad, and what's ugly, what's really hard, what's really challenging. And it's a way to surface all these things, and it's healthy. And actually, one of the things, I think one of the assumptions around remote working is that some of these connections start to unravel. But actually, and I've noticed this in calls too, I think in a way people are a little more open and honest and pay attention, listen a bit harder when you're coming through this sort of channel, this remote working channel, than if you're just sitting around a table in the office where it's one meeting after another. Yeah. And people can often drift in and out of those meetings and not pay attention. So, just some simple new rituals for remote working are great. Just as an aside, Sendle has been a remote company from day one. So from the very, very beginning, our dev team, they're all onshore in Australia, but they're scattered from Adelaide to Hobart to Byron Bay. The support team is remote. There's no kind of headquarters really. There's in Glebe there might be a dozen people in Glebe on any given day, but most of the company is scattered around the planet and working remotely. And so I think it took a bit of getting used to, and it took a bit of design. But celebrating things is something, they're called assemblies. We have assemblies, and part of the agenda in an assembly is to talk about some of the good things that have happened. So you just need to ritualize these things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a really challenging time right now for a lot of organizations, to say the least. I think what I think is good maybe to end on is just like, it's okay to win right now. I think there's it seems from some of the conversations, not from all of the conversations, but from enough of them, there's a guilt to winning right now. There's a guilt to doing well, just when there's a pandemic happening, right? And what would you say to that point? Because I know I have very strong opinions, but I'd love to know, the kind of the advice on how do you kind of handle that guilt of succeeding in an environment like this, especially when other people around you are saying, well, how come that's happening right now? You shouldn't be doing that.
I think, look, inspiration is really important. And let's not forget that people, and I'm assuming that the people who are watching this, they're in businesses and people who start businesses over-index on optimism, positivity, openness, kind of breadth of interests, and other stuff too, like, bipolar disorder and ADHD. But they kind of come together because those are important qualities in order to be an entrepreneur, in order to be someone who starts a business and leads a business and wants that business to be successful. They're really important things. And so back to your question about success and guilt right now, I think there's sort of a responsibility that if you're lucky enough to be kind of winning or having some success at the moment, to share that with great humility and in the context of obviously a world that's very troubled and chaotic and in crisis. But that's inspiring for all those other people who are much as you are, those things: positive, optimistic, curious. It's kind of important, I think, that people can see that it's still possible to be successful, that everyone is not totally overwhelmed, not everything is going south, that there are there are examples of businesses and people that are doing really well in this. That inspiration is an important service, I think, to other people. So share it, and share it with the people that are immediately involved with it, that you're working with, and find a way to share it that's not annoying, but beyond. I think it's important for all of us that we can see bits of that.
Great. I think that's a fantastic point to finish this podcast on. Thank you so much, Craig. This has been a fantastic Zoom chat. I've been having so many of them these days. I'm sure so have you for your whole life. Sendle.com. So if you need some shipping done, then go to Sendle.com. That's highly recommended. Look, again, thank you so much, and have a good day.
And you. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the chat.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Manifesto podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. For more episodes, please visit growthmanifesto.com/podcast.